Hello, 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 people. Welcome back to the mufcMPB channel. It's another week where I am joined again by Mr. Ben Jacobs. And to be honest with you, it's always a pleasure because you can almost guarantee, as much as you can in this industry, that it's pretty concrete information. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining me once again. I know how busy you are, and thanks, as I say, for taking the time out to join me. And I think we should just get straight into things because there is so much to talk about Man United with so little time. And I just want to start with the name that we have been discussing between ourselves for quite a long time now, really, in Dan Ashworth. Dan Ashworth to Manchester United. Are we any closer to an agreement? And what's the mood music, if you like, from your side of things with that one?
I do think it's close. I think it's a case of when rather than if. And naturally, Newcastle wouldn't have said that Ashworth was leaving and placed him on gardening leave if they thought that it was in doubt in many ways. And you have kind of two perspectives. Manchester United don't want to overpay, which means they might have to wait. But ultimately, Newcastle can't be that bullish given their financial situation because gardening leave is not an inconvenience only to Manchester United. It's Newcastle paying Ashworth a wage each month during that gardening leave. So then suddenly they've got two sporting directors on the books over that period of time. And I think Manchester United are using that in negotiations. The number 20 million plus to get him for summer might be worth paying, but sources have always said that Manchester United are prepared to wait. And the main priority is don't lose Ashworth for two windows. So creating a situation where the full 20 months of gardening leave occurs means you don't get Ashworth until summer 2025. Whereas if they can compromise and have him working towards that summer and the January 2025, it will be important. Because remember, Manchester United, as I reported and Ratcliffe has now confirmed on the record, are looking at a 3-year plan over 5 windows, 3 summers, 2 Januaries. So if Ashworth was somehow not really able to influence this summer, the January, and be part of that summer planning, then 3 of 5, he's basically on gardening leave for, or he's late to the party. And Manchester United want to avoid that situation. So I think if they decide to pay up, they'll have him for the summer. If they don't, I think the priority will be to try and get him starting on September the 1st.
Yeah, and another name as well that's been linked with Manchester United quite a lot recently. But, it's almost a bit of a struggle to really find anything concrete in terms of any sort of announcement from INEOS or anything like that with Dougie Freedman. Now, of course, as I say, it's a name that's been linked. He's been lauded as one of the best in the business when it comes to what he does when it comes to the recruitment side of things for a football club. Is he an option genuinely for Manchester United? And how likely could he be as an individual coming into Manchester United?
Well, he's always been on the list, and we know that Sir Alex Ferguson endorses him as well. But at the moment, Crystal Palace haven't had any approach. I know we heard some reports, and by excellent and credible people, that an approach might be forthcoming. But at this stage, I think INEOS are trying to walk before they run. So it's sort out Ashworth, one. Then it's work out, depending on what happens with Ashworth, who they may need for the summer, whilst he potentially, if this materializes on gardening leave. And that's where Jason Wilcox comes in. And they're much more advanced. I don't want to paint the word advanced as suggesting that they're on the brink of an agreement at this point, but they're more advanced comparative to anything with Dougie Freedman, which is why Crystal Palace haven't had an offer, whereas Southampton are well aware of the situation and that Wilcox is on Manchester United's radar. So it wouldn't surprise me if things move with Ashworth, then Wilcox. And with Freeman, Manchester United sources are downplaying that anything is developing to the point of something being imminent today or tomorrow or next week. So we're going to have to wait and see, because the opportunity when you interview each of these people and you're building a structure from the top down allows you to have input from them within the legal confines of gardening leave. But if you're interviewing someone, you're obviously going to get their thoughts. You're going to ask what the strategy is. And I can't emphasize enough that INEOS want to build from top down. So we're moving away from this Manchester United are hit and miss at times, sack the manager or change everybody but the hierarchy and the structure. Sporting control is now about structural change, and INEOS are moving fast, but they're not going to rush themselves and they're not going to deviate from the process. There's no point in going to Freeman or Wilcox or anybody else before you've sorted Ashworth, because you need to know who your top guy is, along with that relationship between that top person and naturally the INEOS-led team, and of course the Glazers, and then using all of that collaborative input plus Omar Barada, who will join during the summer, you then start building all of your recruitment team and anyone else that you need in the business. If you make sporadic recruitment, then it's counterproductive to that very considered structural process. And Jim Ratcliffe knows that. And this is why I think we're not hearing much about some of the other names in terms of progress at this point. But I'd expect that to change, particularly with Wilcox over the coming weeks.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's just one of them things, isn't it? Where Man United almost, well, the fans anyway, want an instant update as the hours go by. But if we're being realistic,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen like that, is it?
Also, though, just briefly, it's not a transfer.
Yeah, of
And
course.
the
Yeah.
takeover wasn't a transfer, or the investment of Ratcliffe wasn't a transfer. And I think it's very easy to think about it in very basic transfer terms. And maybe we as media are a bit to blame. So I hold my hands up if so.
Don't say
But you
that,
see,
Ben. You're encouraging it a bit too much. We already get enough as it is. But yeah, I think you're right
you
there
see a
without
name, you
doubt.
see a headline, you hear your club admires someone, and naturally some fans go into transfer mode and they think, well, admired,
Yeah.
what's next approach? If we admire them and we are considering an approach, or we've made an approach, how have we not got an answer from them, and why is something not been agreed? Because these are not 50, 60, 70, 80 million pound players. Most recruitment people, if they want to come, the challenge is not actually the money, Ashworth aside, it's the gardening leave period and when they can start, and it's usually done quite discreetly and quickly. But I think the difference is that just because Barada came fast and just because Ashworth is someone that Manchester United need, there's a lot of good people within the football club. There's a lot of others that will be scrutinised and judged. So it is a process. And it's not just about saying we want to bring in 4, 5, 6, 7. It's always been indicated to me that they want multiple recruitment experts at a senior level. So that might be 2, it could be 3, but I just don't expect them to rush it. And why do you have to rush it? To some degree, because you either know when they can and can't start, and then you've got effectively as many days as you like because there's no deadline like with a transfer, or alternatively, you know that they can start potentially for the next window. And then even if you need another week or another month, at this stage in the year, the timing's good to get them. And whether it's mid-March, mid-April, or even early May, as far as the summer is concerned, if they can start for that window, it probably won't make that much difference. Because remember, Manchester United's window is also affected by if they get Champions League. It's affected by financial fair play and profit and sustainability. And this is why Ratcliffe is saying, don't expect everything on the football side, spending-wise, player-wise, even outgoings, all in one window. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, exactly that. And, you mentioned there a little bit in terms of obviously the transfers, that it's not quite how that works out. But one thing that I do think is certainly something that's caught the eye of Manchester United fans at the moment is a certain John Murta being spotted in sunny Spain. There was also pictures of him in Barcelona. I think even there might have been 1 or 2 images of him being in Madrid as well. I mean, it's quite funny, isn't it? I think if this was about 15, 20 years ago, no one would have ever got wind of this. But in the era of social media, nothing will ever slip the fingers of any football fans across the world. So have you heard anything about what this specific tour, if you like, of Spain it sort of entailed, and what exactly was the reason why John Murta was spotted discussing, or even in that part of the world with Deco, of course, the sporting director of Barcelona? What have you heard about that?
I mean, it is all just relationship building and part and parcel of his job, at least at the moment. There's nothing progressing. There's no sort of covert plan going on. It's just John Murta doing his job. He went to Saudi Arabia for relationship building as well. And we know that there's a lot of interest, for example, in Casemiro and Rafael Varane from Saudi clubs. And it would be more weird to me anyway, if John Murta wasn't traveling and wasn't meeting people, because this is ultimately, at the moment anyway, the job. So people have kind of put 2 and 2 together on this one, and they are presuming that somehow it's about selling Greenwood to Barcelona. And that's not my understanding. I think Ratcliffe's been clear that he will take a decision on Greenwood, and he will respect the process that Manchester United did that ultimately saw him not reintegrated and sent out on loan to Getafe. And I think once there is clarity on that, then Manchester United will be able to move forwards. And of course, they want a fee for Greenwood. They don't want to loan him out again. And Getafe know they're not going to get another loan in likelihood, and also that they can't afford to buy the player. So then people suddenly start saying Barcelona. Well, guess what? Barcelona can't afford Mason Greenwood either, and they're not, to my understanding, working on him at this point. So I think that Murta meeting people, traveling around in Saudi, in Spain, it's just his job. And it doesn't necessarily mean one target, because if you don't have that face-to-face, if you don't have that relationship with multiple clubs, when you need to do business, incoming or outgoing, you're not going to be in the right position. And I think this is probably more Murta making sure, regardless of what happens with him in the long term, that Ratcliffe and INEOS know that he's out and about in the market and he's doing everything possible in order to summer plan.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe even get a bit of credit in the bank to save his job in the near future as well. But I think, look, you know, yeah, it's going to be something that, again, I've said to you before, haven't I, that, you know, everyone's almost on this trial basis, whether it's the players, whether it's the hierarchy at Manchester United. I think this refresh of everything is going to be so pivotal, really, isn't it, in Manchester United's short and long-term future. And one man who's going to be absolutely essential to the future of the club is the manager. And now whether or not that's going to be Erik ten Hag, it remains to be seen. You know, Manchester United are struggling this season, it's fair to say. But it is my understanding that INEOS do respect Erik ten Hag. They see a lot of traits in him that are quite admirable, which is understandable, of course. But in terms of that, of course, you know, as we say, it's going to be a new dawn of Manchester United. This almost feels like a bit of a window opportunity if Manchester United don't get Champions League football to maybe cut ties and really start fresh, not just with the hierarchy, but also with the Manchester United manager as well. So what are the likelihood, firstly, of Erik ten Hag being sacked in the summer? And also, if they were to go down that route, INEOS, what type of manager would they sort of look for? Because there are, of course, names like Julian Nagelsmann, for instance, who seem to be quite high in the list of favourites, shall we say, for INEOS.
Yeah, I think it's a very similar situation to Chelsea, whereby INEOS and Ratcliffe are simultaneously not predetermining Erik ten Hag's fate yet, and at the same time succession planning. And people hear that and say, well, how can you be drawing a list up of candidates internally while still saying that you hope it works out with the manager? And believe it or not, it's very normal. Brighton, since day one of appointing Roberto De Zerbi, are knowledgeable enough and have been through the process before with Graham Potter to know that if it all goes according to plan, their manager will be in demand and they may not wish to stand in his way. So they don't want to lose De Zerbi as of now, but they're succession planning, because if you don't, then you're left in managerial limbo. And much like any profession, when you hold a job interview, such as when Ten Hag got the job, you speak to other candidates. You may like more than one candidate. You may maintain relationships with them. That's part of succession planning. And people get with window planning that clubs might work ahead because a player might not be available today, but they might be in 2 or 3 windows' time. And that's just normal. It's sensible. But somehow, as soon as there's any suggestion that another name is being spoken of, the natural conclusion is to say the writing is on the wall, especially with Manchester United having been inconsistent at times. I'm still told that INEOS have done 2 things. One, they've said to Ten Hag, it's up to you to prove yourself, and therefore nothing is predetermined and you'll be judged in the summer. And 2, they've said there's no guarantees. And Ten Hag understands that if there's no guarantees, they will internally be looking at other options and doing their due diligence. It's not just Ten Hag, it's every department, and every senior person at Manchester United is being looked at this point as part of a strategic review that half started, led by Sir Dave Brailsford, before completion, and now is continuing because they're formally in the clubs. They can get their hands dirty, they can meet people, they can understand on the ground and internally what it's really like at the football club, as opposed to just due diligence from the outside in. And this is why it's too soon to draw conclusions. And it might sound like just sitting on the fence in terms of how I'm reporting that, but it's the reality. Yeah. And anyone saying he's definitely going now or definitely staying now, to my understanding, is taking a little bit of a extreme view and can be burned by that extreme view. Because if he was, as some have suggested, a so-called dead man walking in inverted commas, then he'd already be gone. it's not good business. It's not the INEOS way to have someone they know they're going to replace just limping towards the end of the season. They'd make a change, they'd find the manager, or they'd bring in an interim. So Ten Hag does have the opportunity to still prove himself, but it will be results dependent. If he gets Champions League, then probably stands a decent chance of keeping his job and developing a relationship. If he doesn't get Champions League, then they may reassess during the summer and move in a different direction. Pochettino's in the same position at Chelsea at the moment as well. Other name-wise, even though it's a little bit disrespectful to Ten Hag, but if we're talking about succession planning and names that have been mentioned, then it is not true that Thomas Frank is one of the names, but it is true that Graham Potter's being considered. And the reason why Potter has come up is because he was liked for Nice. So the group are aware of his work and they feel like he maybe got a bit of a bad rap at Chelsea under very difficult circumstances. But again, these names I'm giving are not in any order. There's no front runner at this point. Julian Nagelsmann comes with the complication that he obviously will be a part of the Euros with Germany. And if you wanted a transition, you're not going to get him on day one of the off-season. There'll be a little bit of waiting time. I don't think that will be a deal breaker, but it counts as a negative. I think the other thing is that Nagelsmann, brilliant coach, but perhaps question marks over his strategic and personality fit. And that was definitely the case when Chelsea looked and also when Tottenham explored the possibility as well. I'm relatively certain on a long list of 6 or 7 that Zinedine Zidane will be on there as well. We know Roberto De Zerbi and Ruben Amorim will be linked with almost every single job under the sun. And I think that's normal because they're both top managers. I think that Hansi Flick will be in demand by a variety of clubs as well. But really at this point, all we're doing is putting out internal names that are assessed as part of a very usual and expected process by virtually every club who has a manager that may stay or may go. And before you determine, you don't want to be left in limbo because the summer's such a key transitional period. So we are going to have to wait a little bit. And it'd be very easy for me just to say, I think he's going, or I think he's staying, and then nail my colours to that. And I've got a 50% chance of being right. But at this stage, if INEOS don't know, then how can we as journalists know? And that is just the reality of where we're at the moment. So it's a good incentive for Ten Hag because he knows that nothing is certain. He's definitely not been told he is staying categorically beyond the summer. So he now has to use that as a motivating factor to drive results and give him the best possible chance, therefore, of keeping the job. And I think from Manchester United's point of view, that's only a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we're running out of time, but there was just one final question I wanted to ask you, Ben. Considering your links with Saudi Arabia, considering the contacts you do have in that part of the world, and of course the name of Rafael Varane at Manchester United at the moment, you know, it's a name that's really interesting Manchester United fans because I think if you would have asked them at the start of the season, would you be open to Varane leaving? I think they would have said potentially because of the injuries and stuff like that. But this season, you know, I think he's been available for pretty much the majority of the season. But if, of course, it does get to the end of the campaign, he will potentially leave on a free this summer. So what do you know about that? Of course, there will be interest, as you know, from Saudi Arabia and potentially elsewhere as well. But is he expected to leave Manchester United on a free this summer?
Yeah, I think if he does leave on a free, remember Manchester United had the ability to trigger an extension. And when you choose not to, it's usually saying if the player leaves, you're happy just to get the wage off the book. And by not triggering the extension, you may not demand a modest fee. And that might mean that there's a vast array of suitors, which helps the player. Obviously, either way, if contract expires, the wage is off the books. So Manchester United don't really care. From Varane's point of view, though, he would rather be in a position where he can choose to leave on a free, or he can delay until a bit later talks and then consider a reduced package. So it sort of suits the player, but it's an indication that Manchester United think triggering doesn't lead to any significant fee comparative to just not triggering, keeping options open, keeping it flexible for the player, giving themselves in their back pocket the ability to offer a reduced terms contract that they tried, obviously, with David De Gea, and at the same time making it very easy for the player to explore options. So it allows a lot of freedom for all parties. With Saudi Arabia, long before the sort of alleged fallout and the mysterious lack of game time in the kind of middle or early to middle part of the season, So long before all of that, really even dating back to last summer, the Saudis were very confident and they felt like Varane was a really viable possibility. And it was, I think, re-emphasized to them in January when John Murtough made a visit in and around the Club World Cup that he was a name that they could get. And at that stage, Murtough didn't seem particularly confident that Varane would have a new reduced terms deal offered. But now we have to wait and see what's happened because he's back in the fold and he's still very useful, I think, personally, to Manchester United. But the point I'm trying to make is deal makers have always thought that this was possible. And Al Ittihad and Al Nassr are both working on a deal. And the Saudi Pro League are going to have 6 marquee signings, or in and around 6, from a list of 20. They want about a third of the names to come. And Kevin De Bruyne, Mo Salah, Casemiro, Rafael Varane, some say Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Remember, Al Nassr tried in January, but Manchester United didn't want to play ball at that stage. Let's see whether the summer is any different. Maybe Luka Modric and a few others will all be on that list of 20. And a large proportion of that 20 could well be Premier League players, and 2 or 3 of them could be Manchester United ones. And of that list, Varane is a name, even though he said that he wants to end his career at either one of his former clubs or stay at Manchester United. Despite those public comments, Saudi deal makers feel like he's possible. And Al Ittihad are the most advanced in terms of putting together a personal package for Varane, 3-year deal, 30 million euros salary, which could be quite tempting to him at his age. So I still think we're probably a month or 6 weeks away from getting a bit more clarity or progression on this one. But Varane to Saudi, very realistic possibility. And on the Saudi side, they're quite optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope after this podcast, Ben, that some Manchester United fans are more optimistic as well. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day again to join us on mufcMPB to give us all the information regarding the club. And as I always say to you, Ben, just make sure you are getting the rest now and then when you can, mate.
Yep, I will get some sleep. Although Champions League tonight, let's see whether Arsenal can overturn that deficit. I'm sure Manchester United fans will be hoping not.
Yeah, I think we'll have our Porto scarves out for the remainder of the day. But Ben, like I say, as always, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to everyone who has joined the podcast, listened today. Please be sure to like and subscribe. You know the drill by now. Follow on Twitter or X. I'm still quite unsure on what to call it these days, but you know the bird app with the X or whatever you want to call it. Make sure you follow MUFC MPB on that. Follow Ben as well for all the updates regarding not just Manchester United, not just Saudi Arabia, but pretty much across all of football. Ben is right across it. Please be sure to join me next week when I will be joined by another brilliant guest, hopefully to bring you guys some more Manchester United news.